Welcome to my experiment in trying to translate some of my blog content to the video medium. Let's start with Ken Ham. You can't get much fringier than the young earth creationist who has made millions of dollars for a fake museum that purports to demonstrate that the world was destroyed in a gigantic flood 4,300 years ago, and who is now building a life-size model of the big boat so that he can sucker even more money out of the pockets of yokels. I actually ran a couple of articles about him this past week. One was about his peculiar detestation of Earth Day. He thinks it's an atheist holiday or a pagan holiday. He can't quite make up his mind. We're supposed to use biblical principles to interpret evidence, you see. And according to the Bible, only God can affect the climate, and he promised he wouldn't destroy the earth again. Well, at least not until the final apocalypse. So we should just sit back and enjoy the Lord's bounty. Any fluctuations in the climate are simply a consequence of our sinful nature. Ken Ham himself says this. He says, I argue that the Earth's climate has gone through a few major periods of change, but in every case, humans did not produce the change. Ever since the flood of Noah's time about 4,400 years ago, people have seen an unsettled Earth in its sin-cursed state. Many smaller climate changes have occurred and continue to occur, perhaps in cycles. Whether humans have contributed significantly in a detrimental way is just not suggested by the evidence we have at hand. So Ken Ham, in addition to being a creationist, is a climate change denier. The other issue that came up was on Rebecca Watson's Skeptic, where she said that she didn't bother to visit the Creation Museum recently because when she talked to a representative, they were sensitive about being mocked. Ken Ham is so sensitive to being accused of being too sensitive that he had to write a long letter insisting that he was not too sensitive. Sensitive? Ken Ham's nerves are all a-tremble at any slight delivered to his pride and joy, his edifice to ignorance, the Creation Museum. A comment on a blog drives him to make a public rebuttal, and look what happens when another person publicly criticizes his palace of stupidity. Bill Nye openly said that Ham's awful museum was not suitable for impressionable children. So Ham indignantly makes his own video slamming Bill Nye the science guy. I mean, Bill Nye the humanist guy.
Well, I really believe we should call Bill Nye the science guy, Bill Nye the humanist guy. In fact, Bill Nye really doesn't understand science. And you know, Bill Nye really doesn't understand science. He's called Bill Nye the science guy. He doesn't understand science. He doesn't understand the difference between observational science and historical science.
Okay, so Ken Ham, the guy who believes the Earth is 6,000 years old, the guy who has no scientific training at all, the guy who makes up crap in his museum to excuse his execrable nonsense that he's peddling to people, he's instructing Bill Nye on how science works. Okay. Another aspect of the paranoia of creationists is on display in their museum. They don't like having their views challenged or innocent young Christians exposed to science, so they have guards. Oh, excuse me, no, they're called public safety officers, armed with tasers roaming the place. I'm not quite sure why. It's not like anything there is valuable, just ridiculous. We had our own run-in with the delicate sensibilities and fragile egos of the Creation Shack's charming team when we visited there a few years ago. One of the attendees was told to turn his t-shirt inside out because it said, "There's probably no God," and was later kicked out for calling the gift shop cheesy within earshot of a fundy family from West Virginia. It's a short hop from the young earth creationists under Ken Ham to that other pit of lies on the opposite side of the country, the Discovery Institute. For years, the DI has been trying to sell this line of bullshit that they are entirely secular, not at all founded on religious sensibilities, and that they just do science. Their intelligent designer could be an alien, they suggest, not God, or at least that's the message they try to spread in public. The mask slipped a bit more this week with the announcement that Stephen Meyer, a director at the Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture, is now shilling for James Dobson's Focus on the Family. What he does with the patriarchal faith heads there is pretend to be a college professor, making hokey PR videos with him passionately addressing a classroom of dim, glum students who are all sad about how the atheists are winning. Just the association, though, is damning. It's not just Christian, it's far-right medieval barbarity. But in these clips, he openly declares that science is evidence for God, not just an alien, not just an ambiguous designer, but literally for the God he believes in.
The existence of God provides the only coherent account or explanation of an objective morality. So belief in God is, as one of the historians said, much more credible now than any time in the last 100 years. It's the best explanation of all of reality and experience. And that, for me, is why I believe it.
So Stephen Meyer claims that all of the scientific developments in the last century have made his faith more credible. The last century has been the development of neo-Darwinian theory. We have natural explanations for the origin of life on this planet that have developed over this last century. And somehow he wants to pretend that that makes the idea of a magical creator even more probable. Of course, the way he does this is the Discovery Institute has made it a cottage industry of simply denying all of the modern science that has been developed in this past century, so of course it's easy for him to do that. So here's what I want to know. Where and what is this evidence that has emerged in the last century that supports the existence of a God?
When we find information in the DNA molecule encoded in digital form, the best explanation is that that information also had an intelligent source.
Oh, geez. Okay. That's terrible. There's two obvious glaring flaws with his whole argument. One is that he's making a false assertion. DNA is not digital. Sure, some of the coding is, but the expression and regulation of DNA is much more complicated than that, and it's more of an analog system when you get right down to it. So it's not quite as simple as he makes it. And then the big logical argument is his whole idea is flawed. This is simply an argument from metaphor. He's saying, because computer programs are designed, therefore, if I can make any kind of comparison between a computer program and DNA, DNA must similarly have a programmer. Total nonsense. That doesn't work. This is exactly the same as the argument that because people can make noise, anytime there is a noise, there must be an intelligent agent behind it. Okay, that's enough of the wretched, exasperating buffoons. Let me just end with a promise of giddy, silly, absurd buffoons to come. So I've been invited to a conference of all things, a special conference being held in Minneapolis in October. It's the Paradigm Symposium. This event will be a major congregation of flakes from all over the world, meeting in Minneapolis to discuss alien astronauts, reincarnation, Bigfoot, miracles, and gods, all without a single skeptic on the premise. Except one. Buried in that long list of proponents of woo, one name is weirdly different. Mine. I'll be reporting from ground zero of this huge assemblage of New Age crackpots, arguing with them, and who knows, maybe getting gently, they are very nice people after all, shown the door after my vibrations damp out all the magic at the meeting. Look for more reporting on the Fringe in October for sure, and maybe sooner. By the way, I checked out most of the names on that list, and most were unfamiliar to me, so maybe I'll learn something new. I did notice one name that those of you who have ever turned on the History Channel will recognize. Giorgio Tsoukalos. I look forward to learning the truth about the aliens.